вещей в нашем русском обществе принципиально нет. У нас нет рассудка и воли.
I just want to follow up on that very last thing he said. We have neither reason nor will. What does he mean by that?
Yeah, so that's an interesting statement, and it's important not to misinterpret it. He's not saying that Russians don't have, that they don't have intellect, that they're not rational, that they're not reasonable. That's not what he means when he says that they don't have reason. What he means is that they've never tried to become scientifically rational as the final goal of human development. You know, in Western history, we at some point said religion is something outdated, something antiquated. It's something that's not precise enough. It's not amenable to scientific calculation and technical control. And so they tried to replace faith and a kind of belief in higher powers and things like that by this powerful force of reason. And what Dugin is saying is Russia never went through that tradition, and they never had it become part of what it means to be a Russian person. So for a Russian person, faith is just as important as reason. It was never something that they erased from the picture. One way of thinking of this, if you look at Christian religious symbolism, you might think of the devil that rebelled against God by asserting his reason. He said, I could know everything on my own, self-assertion of his will, and that's a fallen angel. From Dugin's point of view, that describes the West, actually, is in that sense turned its back on God in a way that Russia never did, and never should.
It's interesting because, of course, sitting from the West, if we see that line, we have neither reason nor will, my hunch is our reaction will be, well, you better go get some because we're going to need that to get along in this world. They don't see it that way.
Dugin doesn't see it that way. If we understand again what exactly he means by reason and will, because the people who say Russia should acquire reason and acquire will are essentially saying, again, become like the West, follow our path. We've got the way. We know where progress is moving. We know what it entails. We know why it's important. Science is the way that we should be going. Self-assertion is the way that we should be going. Get rid of your religious traditions. Like Putin said yesterday in his speech, he said Crimea has a sacred significance to Russia. If we invite Russia to get reason and will, we can't speak of geographical territories having sacred significance. So the invitation for Russia to acquire reason and will is really just another package of saying, be like the West, do what we do, think like we think. And of course, that's something that Dugin is very much opposed to. And it's very evident and growing increasingly more evident that Putin himself is opposed to that path and doing something really radically different.
If you needed, though, any further proof that Western liberal democracy and what's going on over there are so wholly different. I mean, Putin's line about the collapse of the Soviet Union being the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century, I mean, we don't believe that. We are happy to see communism's backside. What does Dugin have to say about 70 years of an utterly failed, discredited system of being? Communism.
Yeah, so that's a great question, but we have to distinguish something. We have to distinguish something very important. One thing is communist ideology, which the liberal world was happy to see go, and so was Dugin, because Dugin is an anti-communist. And Putin, if you read his 2013 speech at Valdai, also says the communist experience is no longer proper or suitable for us. So on all counts, we're happy to see the communist ideology buried. But Putin's statement has to do with the geopolitical catastrophe of the collapse of the Soviet Union. So imagine the Soviet Union on a map of the world. And now imagine the borders of the Russian Federation, and you'll see a very radical contraction. So it's that geopolitical contraction that both Dugin and Putin see as so problematic. So if you look at that territorial space and you start from, let's say, 1,000 years ago and just roll forward in time, and you'll see that the borders, they pulse, they move forward, they contract a little bit. So it's a living territorial space geopolitically. But what happened with the collapse of the Soviet Union was that that heartbeat underwent a heart attack. It contracted so radically that the Eurasian identity, the territorial space, it really suffered a catastrophic blow. And so Dugin and Putin both think that as you get the Russian Federation back into its good shape, and as you have the Eurasian Union or regional integration increasing, you're geopolitically speaking, this is distinct from ideology, geopolitically speaking, you're putting that back on its proper footing, back into a healthy order.
Proper footing, meaning Russia needs to have control over its neighbors.
Russia needs to have integration with its neighbors along civilizational, cultural commonalities. And I really think that that's the underlying aim of the Eurasian Union project. It's much more than just economic. It really seeks to establish that regional, cultural, civilizational identity that can be not necessarily superior to, but in its own right opposed to something like the European Union or NATO or United States. So it's, from a geopolitical point of view, it's returning to its health.